He stood between two shelters at first light, breath freezing before it left his lungs. The canvas hot tent on his left wore a coat of white frost. The felt yurt on his right looked the same, ice crystals covering its rounded walls like frozen fur. Both structures sat 10 meters apart in the clearing. Both had small iron stoves inside. Both would face the same enemy today. -45 degrees Celsius. 12 hours in each shelter. Same amount of birch wood. Same thermometer readings every hour. He wanted to know which one would win. His grandfather had trusted yurts for 60 years. His hunting friends swore by hot tents for winter camps. He was tired of guessing. Today he would find the answer through cold, time, and carefully counted logs. The sun barely touched the horizon, offering light but no warmth. He picked up his notebook and walked toward the tent first. The hot tent was a simple canvas structure with a metal frame, tall enough to stand in, with a stovepipe poking through the roof. He had used it for hunting trips and emergency camps. It set up fast and packed down small. The yurt was different. Felt walls stretched over a wooden lattice frame, traditional design his father taught him to build. It had lived on this spot for 3 years, housing tools and dried meat through every winter. The dome-shaped shed wind and snow naturally. Yesterday he had split birch logs into uniform pieces, counting them twice. 20 logs for each shelter. He stacked them in 2 identical piles between the structures, covering them with canvas to keep moisture out. His wife had watched him prepare, shaking her head with amusement. She believed the yurt would use less fuel. Felt walls breathed differently than canvas, she said. Her grandmother had explained it to her as a child. His son disagreed during breakfast. The tent would win because the stove sat closer to the living space. Heat did not have to travel as far. Before starting, he fed the dogs and chickens, checked the water barrel for ice, and placed 2 identical thermometers on small tables inside each shelter. He wrote the starting temperature in his notebook, -43 outside, getting colder. The test would begin with the tent. He lit the fire in the tent stove at 7 in the morning. The kindling caught fast, and flames wrapped around the first 2 logs with hungry efficiency. Within 20 minutes, the air inside felt warm against his face. The thermometer climbed from -40 to -15. He removed his outer glove to write the number down, but something became clear in the first hour. The canvas walls sweated from the temperature difference, then froze solid. Ice formed along every seam where the fabric pieces joined. Cold air seemed to push through the material itself, forcing the stove to work harder. He added a 3rd log before the scheduled time, then a 4th. The heat rose near the stove, but disappeared toward the walls. His back stayed cold, while his face burned by hour 2. He had used 6 logs to keep the space barely comfortable. The math was not looking good. At this rate, 20 logs would not last 12 hours. He marked the observations in his notebook, fingers stiff despite the fire beside him. At noon, he moved to the yurt, carrying his notebook and thermometer readings. The tent experiment had confirmed his suspicion. Canvas burned through fuel, like paper in a fire. He started the yurt stove with the same method, same kindling size, same log placement. The flames built slowly inside the iron box. The first difference appeared within minutes. The felt walls did not sweat, like canvas. They absorbed some moisture, but stayed mostly dry. The lattice frame behind the felt created small air pockets that seemed to trap warmth. Instead of letting it escape, temperature climbed slower than in the tent. After 30 minutes, The thermometer showed only -25, but the heat felt different, more evenly spread. His back did not freeze while his face cooked. He sat on a wooden stool and tracked the numbers every 15 minutes. By the second hour in the yurt, he had used only 3 logs. The temperature held steady at -12 without constant feeding. The felt walls radiated a gentle warmth back into the space, like they remembered the heat and returned it slowly. His grandfather's words came back to him from 20 years ago. The old man had called felt a living material, not like dead canvas or plastic. It worked with you, not against you. Outside, wind began pushing against both shelters. He heard it testing the tent's canvas, snapping the fabric with each gust. The yurt barely responded, its round shape turning the wind aside. He added a 4th log at hour 3, not because the temperature dropped, but to stay ahead of the cold. His hands felt comfortable enough to write without gloves. The difference was becoming obvious now, written in numbers and felt in his bones. The yurt was winning, and it was not even close. At 4 in the afternoon, he sat inside the yurt and spread his notebook across his knees. The pages contained 6 hours of data from each shelter. Written in careful columns, the numbers told a clear story. The tent had reached higher peak temperatures, hitting -5 at its best moment. But it dropped 10 degrees within 30 minutes if he delayed adding wood. The temperature swung wildly up and down, never settling. Total wood used, 17 logs for barely tolerable comfort. The yurt climbed slower but held, steady between -10 and -15 for hours at a stretch. Once it reached temperature, the felt walls locked the warmth inside. Total wood used so far, 9 logs for consistent, reliable heat. He stared at the difference. 8 logs, nearly half the fuel to achieve better results. The realization hit him like cold water. He had been thinking about heat wrong his entire life. Peak temperature did not matter in survival. Consistency mattered. A shelter that spiked hot then crashed cold was worse than one that stayed moderate and steady. The tent fought against itself, leaking heat as fast as it generated it. The yurt worked with the fire, storing warmth in the felt and releasing it slowly back into the air. Quick warming versus heat retention. Speed versus endurance. His grandfather had understood this without thermometers or notebooks. The old man had built yurts because they kept families alive through months of winter, not just single nights. Outside, the temperature had dropped to -40. The wind screamed across the clearing, shaking the tent's frame until the canvas cracked like a frozen flag. Inside the yurt, he barely heard it. The felt walls stood quiet and firm, holding their warmth like a patient promise. He wrote the final comparison in his notebook and underlined it twice. His wife and son joined him in the yurt as darkness settled over the clearing. They sat on felt mats around the stove while he explained the test results, showing them the numbered columns in his notebook. The yurt had won the fuel efficiency battle without question. 9 logs versus 17. Steady heat versus wild swings. Comfort versus constant work. His wife nodded slowly, her smile quiet and knowing. She did not say anything about being right, but her eyes carried the satisfaction of proven wisdom passed down from her grandmother. His son studied the numbers with surprise, then acceptance. He asked a good question. Did this mean the tent was useless? No, he explained. The tent still had its place. It packed small, set up in 20 minutes, and heated fast when you arrived at camp frozen and desperate. For short hunting trips or emergency shelter, speed mattered more than efficiency. You traded fuel cost for convenience, but for long-term winter living, for keeping a family warm through months of darkness, the Yurt was the clear winner. Different tools for different needs. He added 2 more logs to the stove and adjusted the damper to bank the fire for night. The coals would burn slow until morning, the felt walls holding their warmth through the coldest hours. His family left for the main house, but he stayed a few minutes longer. The notebook sat closed beside him, filled with practical knowledge earned through cold and careful observation. He finally knew the answer, written in numbers that did not lie.